everyone. Before we get started, we just wanted to take a moment of silence to remember the 215 young lives lost at the Kamloops Residential School, as well as many others throughout our history. This episode was recorded before the world got a chance to mourn, and we wanted to pay our respects. The Whitby Public Library also acknowledges that we are on the treaty and traditional territory of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation. May we respectfully honor the knowledge and understanding of the Indigenous stewards of these ancestral lands and ensure that the voices of the First Peoples are represented in our collections, programs, and services. Thank you so much and enjoy the episode.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Whitby Public Library's podcast, Doorway to Discovery. So today we are going to be talking about some books for National Indigenous History Month. So my name is Kylie. My pronouns are she, her.
My name is Kate, and my pronouns are she, her.
My name is Sherry. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm with the Whitby Public Library, Brooklyn branch.
Awesome. So we do have our special guest today, Sherry. So Sherry is here today to join us to talk about some awesome books for this month. I have a book, a graphic novel here. This one is called This Place, 150 Years Retold. The author is actually there's a wide range of authors. There's a lot of different authors for this one, but the editor is Kateri Akawenzi Dam. And there is also a foreword written by Alicia Elliott. So this one is a graphic novel that covers Canadian history retold from 1850 all the way up to present, and then also into the future. It's a bunch of short graphic novels, and I wanted to show just a few panels from it. So we have Annie of Red River. It's beautiful art, and I really, really love about this graphic novel that each short story not only was told by a different author, but it also has a timeline attached to it. So you can see there, it kind of gives you some context before, during, and after the story, which I really enjoyed. It was just like a great way of learning about a lot of different stories. And there's actually some stuff that I remember learning about in high school that was just kind of touched upon that I learned a lot more about simply from reading this graphic novel. So I think that that's a great thing from books, is that you can take something that you know a little bit about and then you can dive deeper into it and learn a lot more. So this one, it covers, there's sections from World War I. There's a soldier who is, let's see if I can find it. There we go. An Indigenous soldier who fought in World War I, and it's his story. There's just a lot of really great stories in here that cover a lot of different time periods and a lot of different people. So yeah, that was what I took for this week.
My pick for this month was Johnny Appleseed by Joshua Whitehead. It was the Canada Reads winner for this year and longlisted for the Scotiabank Giller Prize and so many other things. It deserves all of the accolades it got. This was an incredible read. It's a little hard to describe because it doesn't follow a typical novel path. It's sort of a slice of life novel, and it looks at different time periods during the main character's life. It describes him as a two-spirit indigiqueer person, and so it shows his relationship with the first love of his life and his grandmother and his mother and his community, and it takes place in Winnipeg. And so it talks about, first of all, his adolescence in growing up on the residence just outside of Winnipeg, and then his big move into the city, and sort of the different expectations that he had and what life he imagined for himself until he actually arrived in the city. And so the book just follows, he's supposed to be returning to the reservation for the first time since leaving, because he needs to attend the funeral of his stepfather. And so the book kind of follows the week leading up to that as he's trying to raise money to make the trip back to the reservation. And during that week, he just thinks back on all the different important stories that made him who he is and all the different relationships that made him who he is. So it's a fantastic read. It made me cry multiple times. It's just beautiful. So I highly recommend this book, 100%.
I read Seven Fallen Feathers. It was a really difficult decision to choose which book I wanted to talk about this month, but I think this is one read that a lot of Canadians really need to read here. It is written by Tanya Talega, who is a journalist with the Toronto Star for the last 20 years. So this is written back in 2017. So she's been with them for quite a few years. It has won a long list of prizes. It's longlisted for CBC's Canada Reads, Globe and Mail Top Books, National Post Top Books, and it's been a national bestseller. It's a difficult read. I've started it before, and I finally came back at it. I did it by book and by audiobook at the same time, and I would recommend both of them. If you prefer audiobook, definitely it was well done. The narrator is Tanya herself, and the just the tone is it's somber at times, but it's also hopeful at times. The story starts with a visit. Back in 2011, she was up in the Thunder Bay area with the chief of the NAN, which is a big organization of the reserves up in that area. And it covers like 45,000 people or so. And that's First Nation members. And she was up there to try to promote voting in the 2011 election and how important it was that, you know, the Indigenous voice was really important, and to actually take that responsibility and vote, because we had a conservative leadership at the time that was really trampling over Indigenous rights. And when she was sitting in the office with I can't remember the gentleman's name. He kept saying, you know, why aren't you doing a story about Justin Wabas? He's been missing for quite a while now, and 70 days. And she hadn't heard anything about it at the time. And finally, it was a kind of a back and forth. No, you know, I'm here to talk about Indigenous voting. And he's, no, you need to do this story. So finally she set aside her, as she said, you know, her kind of Toronto journalist thinking, and listened to him and realized that there was a story there. This was another boy who had gone missing and was found, his body was found in the river in the Thunder Bay area. And the book really, it starts with the whole history of the government, the treaties, just the abuse, residential schools. It lays that foundation for the reader so they understand what's kind of, you know, where we're at, why we're here, why these children are being sent to Thunder Bay, which has a lot to do with, you know, the lack of funding, you know, the treaties promised that there would be schools on these First Nations way up north. But of course, the money isn't there. You know, the water hasn't been corrected and cleaned. They don't have proper housing for areas that are in the permafrost that rot, and, you know, there's black mold, and families have been torn apart. These kids are being sent to Thunder Bay to just finish high school. I mean, just to go to high school, to have a chance to finish an education. And, you know, some of these parents, you know, they're trying to protect their children, but they also want, you know, a better life for them. And in a better life, it means sending them away. And it's a really difficult read. And I totally recommend it. So it follows the deaths of 7 children. It actually talks about Channy Wenjack's story in there as well. They include him because He was in the area as well. You know, his travel along the railroads, and just how these children, you know, they're kind of isolated. They don't know what city living is like. You know, they've come off very small communities and reserves. So yeah, totally recommend.
Yeah, that sounds like a really important read for everyone to kind of know the history of all of this and know kind of the context and to learn. And yeah.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed it. It reads like a narrative, you know, but it is all factual. She is a journalist. Sometimes it's a little dry. Sometimes it's a little, you know, it's very much her point of view and very Indigenous point of view. And some people may not like that. Some people may not like to hear what's, you know, what people are thinking, you know, there's definitely a huge systemic racism problem. There's a huge problem in Thunder Bay. I kind of worry at times. I have family up there, and it's a difficult read, and I think it is an important read for a lot of people, just to understand, you know, where we're at and what our future is going to be. If there was actually a like a hearing after this. It was brought forward, you know, and there were, I think, 146 recommendations that came out of this. And it was just about, you know, even after Chani Wenjack's death, there were 4 to 6 recommendations. I think it was, I want to say 6 recommendations that were made. And one of them was to include high schools at these Northern First Nations so that they could attend, you know, these schools. And none of these recommendations, and this is back in the 60s, were actually implemented. You know, the process is there. This is, even this year we're celebrating the Royal Commission on Indigenous People. It's 30 years, and we're still looking at, you know, where's the action? So.
And even action to the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls as well. Like, you know, there have been a lot of announcements, there's been a lot of publications about it, but I haven't actually seen any action. So yeah, it's a lot of empty words.
Sometimes it is. It really comes down to, you know, the government's needs. You know, they have a whole land base of people here that they have to house. They have to, you know, supply water and resources to, and where are those resources? Well, they're on those far northern reserves that they tucked these First Nations away on, you know, over 100 years ago. So yeah. So that brings me to another book, and I didn't tell you I was going to talk about this one, but it made me kind of sad. But Shelby had mentioned it, and it's called "If I Go Missing." And I wasn't really interested in it because it's a graphic novel, but it's a quick graphic novel, and that this book even needed to be written is such a sad statement to the history of Canada. The author is Brianni Joni, with Nahani Shingos, and art by, I want to say, Shana Capo. But it's a letter that Brianni wrote. She's 14 years old. She's Ojibwe, and just that she is smart. She's a good student. She's a volunteer. She's a daughter. You know, she's got all these great things going. She doesn't do drugs. She doesn't drink. If she goes missing, to look for her, that she hasn't run away. And I thought, that's so sad. Yeah. But really good. So, and it was a quick read. Just a few words on every page. And there's her red dress hanging in the tree.
Yeah, I heard about that one, and that it was a graphic novelization of the letter that she had written.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one that's on my list. It's heavy, but I think it's, again, like a necessary thing for people to be aware of and to understand that this is what people are going through, and we need to be cognizant of that.
Yes. You know, we talk about human trafficking. We're having an issue with human trafficking. You know, we've done our own training at the library about those signals. And it's not just Indigenous girls anymore. You know, it's such a lucrative business for people. And I think a lot of people need to hear this. You know, if a young girl goes missing, sure, maybe she's run away, but to take it seriously. And especially if they're an Indigenous person. And it's not just girls. It's not just girls that are going missing. So I see I follow a few different Indigenous groups on Facebook, and every day there's a new face that's, you know, they're posting about. So it's a really sad situation.
And I think like June is a good opportunity to look into Indigenous history and actually what is happening to Indigenous people in Canada. But obviously this work should be going on constantly, always. But we do have some programming going on at the library in June to help our patrons and our public learn a little bit more about Indigenous history, and also not just history, because Indigenous people are a living and thriving part of the Canadian community. So Sherry, do you want to share any of the programming that we've got going on this month?
I was really happy to be asked to kind of oversee a lot of the programming this month for Indigenous Month. Everything kind of, you know, we're still in that lockdown mode and still in contactless pickup mode for a lot of places. And I reached out to all of the different programs. The book clubs are all doing a book club read that is an Indigenous read. I read the adult book club. They are doing From the Ashes at Brooklyn. Excellent read. Jesse Thistle is the author. He's a Métis who, you know, just lost his way. The drugs, the addiction, the trauma. You know, they say that the residential school trauma is just, it's just generational. You know, it's like a drop in the water here. It just keeps rippling. The effect just keeps kind of moving outward, and the healing hasn't started because the healing hasn't been allowed to start yet. The children's book clubs, both of them were titles that Barb and I talked about. We have an Indigenous story time. Last year, I taught myself to sing some Ojibwe songs for story time. And I taught my storytime listeners how to count to 10 in Ojibwe. And it was really funny because I had all of my things here at the house because we were working from home more last year. And one day my middle son came home and he says, "Oh, what are these?" And they were in a little basket, and they were my numbers that I'd used for my story time. And I said, "Oh, they're how to count to 10 in Ojibwe." And he says, "Scarf, I'm gonna take these." And I said, "Well, do you want me to teach you how to say them?" Because I've never really taught them, because my mom didn't teach us and my dad didn't teach us. They were residential school and day school survivors. They weren't allowed to speak. So I'm teaching me. So I taught myself how to sing Head and Shoulders, Knees and Toes last year. This year, I'm going to try to focus on books from both the First Nation, the Inuit, and the Métis. I have shortlisted my stack of books down to about 6 now, and I have to choose at least just 3 of them. So I'm working on that. And I am teaching myself how to do my story in Ojibwe. Or no, actually Cree. This one is going to be a Cree story. So how to say it in Cree. And I will try it in Cree. It's not my native tongue. We are Ojibwe from where I'm at. But I think that'll be fun. And we're also working on, I reached out to Durham College. The Black History Month has had a panel over the years that they have, that we've hosted here at the library. And I just thought that, you know what, we really need something similar for Indigenous History Month. We need to open that discussion. There are quite a few Indigenous people here in the community. Plus, there's also quite a few First Nations in our community in the Durham region. And so I reached out to Julie Pigeon at the Durham College. She has done some training with us, and she is part of the liaison office for the Indigenous students at Durham College. And we talked about the potential for a panel, and she had mentioned that Pickering Library had reached out to her as well. So our next meeting, we included Pickering Library, and we started talking about this discussion panel that we wanted to do. And it kind of grew. We now have all of the Durham Region libraries on board. We have OT and Durham College on board, so Ontario Tech University. The Durham Region, their Diversity and Inclusion Office is with us, and we have the student unions. So one of our first speakers will be Pam Palmater, who is a Métis, not Métis, Micmac lawyer and professor at Ryerson. She's a very vocal activist for Indigenous rights, treaty rights, and we're really happy. She was on my wish list, but I wasn't sure that we would have the budget to invite her along. So I'm really glad that we found some money to do that. This year is tough, of course, for a lot of us with our budgets being cut during the lockdowns. And I think it's going to be a really important discussion. We are going to broach reconciliation in terms of governance, justice, health, and media. We're going to be talking about resilience, and we have invited the First Nations leaders, so the chiefs from Scugog, Georgina Island, and Alderville, which are some of the territories near us and around us. We are going to be doing resistance, so land defenders and activists, water defenders, and then our resurgence, so the excellence in our community. So people who are doing well, whether they're writers, they're artists, they're sports stars, they're business people. And we've put out invites for that as well. So it's become, one discussion panel has become a 4-part series. And we're really looking forward to it. It's kind of exciting as it grows. So I think that's going to be one of our biggest events this year for Indigenous, and it's going to last through the summer. So every 3 weeks, it will be a new event.
That's awesome. I'm glad to see that it grew so much. Like it went from just 1 to 4. Like that's amazing.
I was kind of worried at first because it was just going to be 1. Okay, we'll let it be what it's going to be. And it was funny because at our last meeting, that was something that Julie said. When we were kind of worried about the date, because the date is coming up, and one of the people from Ontario Tech, a non-Indigenous collaborator. And Julie said, you got to understand, the spirit will do what the spirit will do, and it will get done, and it'll be what it is supposed to be. And that's just the way that Indigenous thinking and belief is and she kind of put that across, right? And I was reminded that, yes, things will work out the way it's meant to work out. We'll get the speakers that we're supposed to have. We'll get the voices that we're supposed to hear, and it will work. And it will be ready for when it needs to be ready. So yes, the spirit will do what the spirit will do.
And actually, I think I have the date. It's June 17th for the first panel, correct?
Yes, our first panel is on June 17th.
Perfect.
Yes, it'll be in the evening. We're going to be doing registration. It'll be kind of a local registration through our group. Our Durham Indigenous Voices is what we've called ourselves. It will be through Eventbrite, through the college's portal. We will have that link through each of the libraries. Each of the libraries will have the link through their own registrations, and the promotions are starting to go out. I know we've pushed ours this week. There will be posters and things that will be coming, and I think it'll be really important. Julie said that we should have quite a few people. It'll be a Zoom meeting, of course, because we are still virtual. When I think we'll have like 400 original registration spots, and then it will overflow into YouTube Live and Facebook Live from there. So there won't be anybody who will miss out if they are truly interested in listening and hearing, from the Indigenous voices here in the Durham region. Then definitely, I hope that they'll be able to attend and listen and ask questions. There'll be some interaction. So yeah.
That's fantastic. And I'm so sorry, we forgot to ask you this before, but Sherry, can you tell us a little bit about your history in Indigenous libraries and Indigenous library programs as well?
Sure. I kind of fell into library work. I've always been a library user. I have been a reader since the time I was, I could tumble into the library. My favorite person in school was my librarian. I actually just loved being there. I loved kind of going through the books. It was just a quiet place. I didn't have to worry about anybody watching me or, other than the librarian. I got to read what I wanted to read. I got to pull out any books. And I love to see children doing that, where they get to, nobody's kind of got a time constraint on them where it's like, we got to go in 5 minutes. I got to look through the shelves and just pull out books. And then when we were children, my sisters and brothers and I used to walk across to the public library and it was the same thing. Now, the librarians there were kind of, they were those older ladies that were, kind of librarians, but they were always really helpful. So in that same sense, I used to love, going to the library. So I moved home back in 1996 and I literally moved home for a job on the reserve. I'd never lived on reserve. We actually never lived on reserve. We belonged to. And I started working with an after-school program. And then the library job came open. And so I applied for the library job and got it. I was with First Nations libraries at my First Nation at Mississauga for probably about 7 years. And I absolutely loved it. I loved building the collection, finding those reads that would get children to read, finding those books for parents and making a place that was safe for families to come to. We had a lot of children, of course, who had to leave the community to go away to school. And we were part of the early Gates Foundation, putting together community websites, the CAP website, the CAP Community Access Program sites, not websites, sites. And I was involved in, it was early. So 1996, we were like T1 connections and making sure that we had internet connections in the community, for everybody. And I remember at the time hearing a story, Industry Canada's goal at that point was to make Canada the most connected. And there was a story about a First Nation up around the James Bay area, and they got a grant to run cable lines from house to house, basically through windows, so that people could access the internet up in the northern areas. And it was so fun to hear. And we were just so busy and active, and I absolutely loved it. It was all about, finding money and finding grants and building these areas, because the internet was so new back then. We were teaching online safety and I laugh now because, of course, back then it was like, you don't put your name online, you don't put your phone online, you don't put your information online, and then boom, there's Facebook, and you put everything online, right? You put everything, all your relations are there and all your friends. And so, yeah, it was a lot of fun. And so First Nations libraries at the time, we initiated a First Nations Library Week. Yeah, we had it like a First Nations Read Week, and we put it in February at the time. But I see that it's moved back to around October. So about the same time we run our Public Library Week. Our original intent was that, it's the winter months that a lot of families are, inside, because during the summers and stuff, they're preparing, right, for the winters. And this is the time that they would be doing storytelling. So this would be a great time to have it. So I was active in a lot of that early kind of just building community web bases, websites, all that early stuff. I really enjoyed it. And coming down here was out of necessity. And I love what I do here. I love being, that person who helps. And I have a story. It was funny. I have a teacher friend whose two sons were doing the probably, I think, grade 2 or grade 3. They do a First Nations, like Indigenous study. And like you mentioned, we're still here, but a lot of it is history. We're talking historical Indian, and we're not talking that, that, geez, Sherry works in the library and she's Indigenous. And he came home, he's like so excited about this study that they're doing about this historical Indian. And the mother says, well, an Indigenous person, like you talk to her every time we go to the library. And he's like, who? And he's like, Sherry is Indigenous. And so, the next time he came in, it was like with this look of wonder on his face, and it was so sweet. So, I get that. I don't mind that. I as long as they're respectful questions, I don't mind if somebody approaches me. And sometimes we're learning together, because I didn't know about residential school either. It wasn't something my parents talked about, even though they were victims of it. So we're learning, and I don't mind that.
Absolutely. And I think just what you're saying about, like, you're still here, Indigenous people are still here, thank God. And I think it's, what I was saying before as well, like, it's important not just to do this thinking and this researching and this learning just in June. It should be happening always. And that's why we decided to do Indigenous history this month, and we did Pride reads back in March, because we wanted to set aside June specifically for Indigenous history. But just wanted to note that we also do have some Pride programs going on at the library this month. So we also have a drag queen story time going on June 16th. And so it's important to celebrate gay pride and Indigenous pride and and Black history and everything at all months of the year. But because this month is Pride Month as well as Indigenous History Month, I thought we could talk a little bit about some queer Indigenous writing that's coming out right now. So the book that I just mentioned earlier, Johnny Appleseed, this is an excellent, yay!
I
read it as well.
So good. It's so good, and we're getting it as a book club set at the library as well. So I think it's such a good read, and I think it really is an excellent look at what it actually, like, not that I would know, but what it actually means to be an Indigenous queer person in today's day and age. Like, all the history to reconcile with, and then all the future ahead. And I took a course when I was in my undergrad that was specifically about Indigenous futurisms. And there's a lot of literature coming out right now about Indigenous futures and what that looks like. And a lot of it intersects with queer stories as well. So there's an anthology series, an anthology book of short stories about queer sci-fi futurisms and Indigenous futurisms, and it's called Love Beyond Body, Space, and Time. I don't have a copy of it here, but we are getting it at the library, and that has a whole bunch of Indigenous authors from all over Canada discussing queer stories. And one of the authors in that anthology is Sherry Dimeline, who wrote The Marrow Thieves, which is another great book, and it has great queer representation, and it is a sci-fi futuristic dystopian novel, and it is technically a YA read, but it reads like adult fiction, I would say, just with a happy-ish ending. And I think this touches on a lot of really important issues right now, because it's the premise of the story is, in the future, Indigenous people of North America are being hunted by white people to have their bone marrow harvested, because white people have lost the ability to dream, and Indigenous people still hold that ability to dream. And white people have found out that if they harvest the bone marrow, then they can return, they can get dreams back. And I think it really touches on that idea of, like, what more can colonizers do? Right. What more can they take from Indigenous people? And so I think the futuristic Indigenous literature is a really important genre right now, because it just looks at what direction are we actually headed. So do you have any other picks for sci-fi futures?
I really enjoyed the Moon on the Crusted Snow, I believe it's called. Wabagijik Rice, yes. We did it for book club last year with the Brooklyn branch. And it was kind of a apocalyptic book. There's, this northern community, and I believe it's Ontario, because they talk about some of the kids have gone away to school, they're down in the city and they're further north, and they've just gotten their cell towers in place, so they've got Wi-Fi regularly, and their phone lines go down, and the power goes down, so the hydro goes off, and they think it's just a one-day thing, so they wait for word that it's going to come back on, and nothing happens, and days go by, and then they realize that maybe there's something really wrong, and they've got their food stores on this First Nation that, this just in case kind of thing. And it's a real, not just that colonizer Indigenous argument, but also, the traditional life and the children who are living a more Western life. And how we would survive in an apocalyptic event. I'm a huge Walking Dead fan, funnily, but I love dystopian and apocalyptic fiction. I always have, and the idea that they should be able to survive. We survived on this continent, for thousands of years. But they have these children who would rather, they're angry because they can't play their games anymore, or they can't get on the internet, talk to their friends. And then you have the traditional people who, get to it. They go out, they're fishing, they're hunting, they're doing their thing that they need to do. So it was really quite a good book. I would totally recommend it. We do have a book club set. It was also, I believe, a hoopla kind of community read at the time as well. So there was that. And I did read the Johnny Appleseed book, and I really liked it. And I wanted to make a comment to it in terms of the queer, two-spirited. When we did the training a while back with Julie Pigeon on, residential schools, and just that whole early, that part of breaking down the community. One of the things that she mentioned about two-spirited people, because of course, this is I've heard of them too, more in just that kind of in terms of the gay community, not that the two-spirited people were actually given governance positions because they could think both in a male and a female way, and that was a special thing. So I thought this was a really good book. It was a little gritty at times. Definitely, I don't see it being everybody's favorite read, but I think it's an important read. There's just so much to say about what's happening in Canada and about Indigenous issues. And I think that just opening that conversation and keeping that conversation going is really important. And the fiction, the literature that's coming out right now, is so top notch. One of the first reads that when I was saying what I was thinking about choosing, one of the first reads I think I read as a teenager was The Education of Little Tree. And then I did In Search of April Raintree. So there was some early fiction there, and there have been authors along the way. It's just that it's growing. There's just more voices. We're educating more of our children. People are taking those voices seriously, and that's a good thing. Those are some things that are positive in all of this. When sometimes it feels like such a struggle. They talk about suicide pacts in some of these northern communities, and it's good to remain hopeful. That one day we will come through this. The United Nations respects the Indigenous rights in Canada and advocates for the Indigenous rights in Canada. The Constitution has our Indigenous rights are inside the Constitution. So every time these things come up, you know, when the government fights the Indigenous people, it comes back that it's our right. Like the Supreme Court always finds in favor of the Indigenous because we have these rights that are entrenched in the Constitution. So one day, you know, our relationship will be positive. It's going to take a lot of struggle, and I think we still have a few generations before we'll get there. Hopefully, you know, sooner than later. But when it comes down to resources, you know, this country's always going to need resources. You know, there's always going to be land that we're going to need, and there's always going to be oil or gas or water or something else that will be necessary. And when the land belongs to, you know, the inherently to the Indigenous people, there's always going to be that struggle. And until people realize, until there's some understanding of what those treaties mean when we signed them with the government and with the crown, well, with the crown really, because it's a crown, then I think there will be some understanding in the population of why, you know, we're at where we're at, and why they have so much resistance right now with the Indigenous people against. There's in the news again, Kanasataki, which was the big, you know, protest back in the 90s at Oka. You know, they're trying to cut down trees on Indigenous land, and it just seems never ending. But one day, you know, our children now are learning. Children in general, not just my children, but children are learning in school. They are learning about Indigenous rights. They're learning about, and like you're at school, you know, you learned about a lot of these things through your classes. So it's there, and that little seed is going to grow, and I'm hopeful. So.
And how do you feel about, you know, we are learning more in classrooms. We are learning about the history of, the real history of Canada, of Indigenous Canada. So how do you think the new Indigenous literature, the fiction and nonfiction that's coming out, how do you think it impacts our perception of Canada that has been taught in schools?
I think a lot of people are surprised. When I was doing some research on my book, Seven Fallen Feathers, just reading even some of the reviews, people are shocked. Even talking to some of the families here, you know, their kids come home and they've mentioned residential schools. And I think people are just unaware, you know, because the history wasn't there for them. And raising that awareness raises the information. It increases the information that's available. The true story starts coming out. You know, you can't keep the truth down. That's just it. Like you can try, and the government has tried, you know, to bury that truth for a long time. And I think that people will be more supportive. There's been a lot of allies created recently in the last probably 10, 20 years. You know, people who are seeing that what's happened is wrong and are now supporting the Indigenous rights. And I think, you know, once that kind of gets out there, it builds and it grows, and you can't continue to be ignorant about it, and you can't continue to live in that bliss, you know, of thinking that, you know, Canada is this great country. It is. It's a wonderful country, you know, but it needs to fix its relationship with its treaty partners, definitely.
Mm-hmm. I think it's interesting too, because I mean, as we were saying, there's a lot of new fiction coming out, and there's a lot of like I've seen a lot of new picture books. I've seen a lot of new like children's fiction and teen fiction coming out too. So it's wonderful that we're getting more adult fiction as well, that like we can be learning about it, but our kids and the youth are learning about it too. And they're learning in school, but then they're also able to translate that into what they're reading as well. I mean, I recently read a graphic novel series called A Girl Called Echo, and it follows a Métis girl who, whenever she falls asleep, she kind of travels back in time, and she's meeting her ancestors, and she's meeting other people in the community where she's living, but hundreds of years ago, and she's learning firsthand what they went through, and she's kind of bringing that back to her school. She's kind of dreaming what they're learning about in history class. She also falls asleep during history class a few times, and her dreams kind of supplement the lessons, but she's able to bring that back to her class and her life, and she starts kind of questioning her teachers and her family, and it's great that we're able to have these stories and a lot of different ways of interacting with them. Like, there is the nonfiction, there's the fiction, and then there's also the graphic novel. Like, there's a lot of applications for it, so it's great.
And representation is really important. We know, when we have more books, more diverse books, it's helpful for the Black community, it's helpful for our Asian community, it's helpful for our Indian community, anybody who is a minority. Even women, when we see more books about young girls who are heroes and heroines, this is great. So seeing Indigenous people on the cover, little brown children, this is perfect. So it really, really helps. And it gives hope. And this is important. It gives that idea that, you're okay, you're enough. And there's a future for your voice, for your dreams too.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And
sometimes it's hard to find Indigenous books in our collection. Sometimes you have to look specifically for maybe it's Ojibwe, or maybe it's Cree, or maybe it's Blackfoot, or Haida, or Tlingit, or Micmac. Or the new catalog has really been helpful, because if you type in Indigenous now, it pulls up a lot of the titles. And Indian is still used in the collection because it's still a legal term. The government still uses it. It's still the Indian Act. One day, hopefully that will change. But we have a lot of great nonfiction. We have some wonderful, there's this whole series called Coast to Coast to Coast. And it goes through quite a few different subjects: cultural appropriation, residential schools, the 60s scoop, spirituality, governance, treaties, protesters. Actually, really, really a good series. So I'm just some really good, that's a children's section. In the children's collection, in the adult collection, we have Clearing the Plains. We have Indigenous relations. We have 21 questions or 21 things you should know about the Indian Act. Just some really good stuff coming out, like Kate had mentioned, and not just in fiction. So we have some wonderful nonfiction books. And let me do a quick little promotion here. We do have the new Pam Pometer book called Warrior Life. And this has just come out. So I have it sitting here. So you'll have to wait for it. She really is a strong voice. She does have her own book club, which is really interesting. So it's an Indigenous book club. So if you're interested in checking it out, she runs it through her Facebook group and her own kind of blog. So yeah.
Awesome. And hey, if you're interested in any of the books that Sherry has there or anything else in the collection, place a hold on it. You can pick it up at Contact with Pickup at any of the locations.
And I think it's important also that you were highlighting kids nonfiction as well, Sherry, because I think, if you're looking for something more accessible, maybe, something that really just takes you down to the basics before you want to build on, adults should access children's nonfiction too. There's a new one that Sherry and I were looking at the library the other day called Treaty Words by Amy Craft. And it's illustrated by Luke Swinson, who did this piece right behind me. His father was from Scugog Nation, and now he lives in Kitchener. It's the book itself. I haven't gone through it all because it was on hold for someone else at the library, but I'm on hold for it now. But it really sort of goes down into the basics and to the fundamentals of what our treaties actually mean. And I think that's really important, and it's important that we have that information in an accessible format. So I think that's another good one in our collection to check out. So.
And I almost forgot about our story walks. We have a partnership with the town of Whitby, and our outreach librarian, Mallory, has created 2 story walks that will include Indigenous titles this summer. And one of them is Thompson Highway's Dragonfly Kites, which is one of my favorites. So I definitely hope that people get a chance to go out and have a look and see around the community what's happening.
Yeah, some safe, socially distanced reading and learning. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, Sherry, for joining us on this episode. Just want to remind everyone, if you are looking for something new to read, we have lots of great programs at the library. You can check out our WPL Suggests, where we have lots of great lists. We'll have a list up there for everything we talked about in this podcast episode, as well as lists that other staff of the library have created. We also have library to go kits that I think all of us are involved in creating. So if you want something, we have library to go kits for kids and for adults. You can fill out a form, give us a little bit of information about what you're interested in, and we will create a surprise kit for you. We also have summer reading clubs. So our TD Summer Reading Club is starting on June 19th. You can register. And that will go all summer long. We have an online portion this year as well, where you can log all of your reading, and you can get some great prizes. You can get beads as well from the library when you log your reading. So that's it. We'll see you all next month. Have a great day. Bye, everyone.
Thanks so much. Bye.